Hilchis Temurah Perek Sheni. Temurah, what's Temurah? What's the tzir of Temurah? In other words, we're learning the din that it's also to make Temurah. What would be the tzir of making Temurah? Hu sheyemer balakorban al behemes chulin sheyeshli. He owns a behemes chulin, and then there's a behemes kochim. It's either his or the bala behema of the kochim gave permission to make Temurah with that behema. He says, Harei zu tachazu. He looked at zu, the first zu is the behemes chulin. Harei zu, this behemes chulin should be tachazu instead of the behemes kochim. Oi, Harei zu khalifa zu. He goes on the behemes chulin. He says, Harei zu, the behemes chulin should be tachas zu, khalifa zu, the exchange for this, which is a behemes kochim. He said clearly, not only harezu tachazu, but harezu tachas chatazu, a tachas eilazu, shehi Temurah, that would also be Temurah. Even the first seer we're talking about, that the behema of kochim is lefanov. He's standing in front of the behemas kochim, and there's the behemas chulin, and he's saying harezu tachazu. Either he said harezu tachazu, harezu khalifazu, or harezu tachas chatazu, or khalifas chatazu. They're both standing in front of him. V'chein, imam harezu, this behemas of chulin, is tachas chatas sheyeshli b'tech habayis. That's instead of the chatas sheyeshli b'tech habayis, tachas eli sheyeshli b'mokim pleni, is harezu Temurah, but who sheyeshli? That's only sheyeshli. In other words, in order to make Temurah, it has to be that he's making Temurah for a behema that he owns, or as we said, a behema that someone gave permission to make Temurah for it. Avalim Omar al behemes chulin harezu tachas eli. He didn't say harezu tachazu. He didn't say harezu tachas eli sheyeshli, but he rather said just harezu tachas eli or harezu tachas chatas le'emaklum. That's b'chlal garnish. V'cheinum Omar harezu michulelas al zu. If a person says this is michulelas al zu, so then is ein Temurah. That's also not Temurah. So now the next halacha also the Rambam is going to discuss the chiluk. There's a gather of chilul, and there's a gather of Temurah. Now, what's the difference between chilul and Temurah? So the pashtus advarim is azay. That the din of Temurah means when a person comes along and says azay, he's speaking about the chulin, and he's saying that this chulin, I want to be magdish this chulin, and I want this kedusha of this chulin should be instead of the kedusha of the carbon. So he starts really with the kedusha of the chulin, and he's saying that now that I have the kedusha of the chulin, I want this kedusha of the chulin to replace the kedusha of the kochim. He's not talking about taking away the kedusha of the carbon. He's talking about putting on the kedusha of the chulin, and through the kedusha of the chulin, he's replacing the kedusha of the carbon. He's saying harei zu, so it be khalifa zu. So this should be kochim, and that should replace that kochim. So what's the din? The din is v'hayahu u'tmurasa yiyah. The original kochim remain kochim, and this Temurah also remains kochim. So you went ahead and you amagdish the chulin to replace the kochim, so the din is they're both kochim. Masha'in came by chilul is fakert. Chilul the pshat azay. I want to take the kochim off, the kodesh off the kochim. I want to take the kedusha of the kochim, and I want to be mechalel that kedusha of the kochim by replacing it with this. In other words, I'm talking about the kochim. I'm being mechalel the kedusha of the kochim. Where should that kedusha go? That kedusha should go on the chulin. So since over here I'm talking about the kochim, over here I'm talking about the kochim, and I'm trying to take away the kedusha from the kochim. I'm being paid with money. Let's say with money. We're paid with money. So you have a behemoth of kochim, you got a moon. So now you're being paid. So what are you saying? You're saying that the kedusha, you want to take the kedusha off this behemoth which is a balus moon. What are you going to do with it? Where's the kedusha going to go? The kedusha is going to go onto the money. It's not sure you're making the money kodesh. You're taking the kedusha off the carbon by putting that kedusha on the carbon. So you're starting by taking it off the kochim and putting it on the money. Al derev zeh, you're putting it on a different carbon, a different behemoth. So you're saying harei zu mechulalas al zu. You're taking the kochim dike behemoth, and you're saying that it should be mechulul. How is it going to be mechulul? It's going to be mechulul by the other behemoth taking this kochim. So the ikar is harei zu mechulalas. You want that the kochim should become mechulalas, and that mechulalas should be alzu, that the kochim should be chal on this other behemoth. So that's not really Temurah. Temurah is fakert. Temurah is when you go to the behemoth of chulin and you're making it kodesh, And you want, now that I have a kodesh over here, I want this kodesh to replace that. So we say, no, it doesn't replace it, it remains. Now, halacha beis, it's clear in halacha beis. Hoyu lefanim shnei behemis. He has two behemis in front of him, achas chulin v'achas hegdish. And shenafel b'mum, he has a chulin and he has a chulin, and he has also a hegdish shenafel b'mum. And that hegdish shenafel b'mum is really royal opinion. You can be paid it. And now, so obviously, if we take money and he would say that the money over here should be paid at this hegdish, so it would be beseder, it would be a mitzvah. Now, hiniach yodi al behel meschulin, he puts his hand on the behel meschulin, va'amar harei zu tachazu. He uses the words harei zu tachazu. That was the words. So we said before, when he said a Temurah, is when he goes on behel meschulin, he says harei zu tachazu. So since he said, he went on behel, he said, hiniach yodi al behel meschulin, va'amar harei zu tachazu. So basically what he's saying is that the chulin should be kodesh, and the kedusha that I'm putting on the chulin should be instead of that kedusha. Is arezu Temurah? That's considered Temurah. And v'leiken, he gets malchus. It's Temurah and he gets malchus. However, he niach yodi al behemis hegdish. V'amar harezu tachazu. Over here, he puts his hand on the hegdish and he says harezu tachazu. So really, what he's wanting to say is harezu chilul al behemis hachulin. He says, but he's not trying to. He's not dealing with the chulin. He's dealing with the kodesh. He's saying harezu tachazu. In other words, the zu and the zu is still the first zu is the chulin, and the second zu is the hegdish. Nevertheless, but over here the word is that he wants to be kilo mechal the hegdish. That's what he's trying to do is he wants to be mechal the hegdish. His first interest is to take off the kedusha of the hegdish, and memela the zu the chulin is going to be instead of the hegdish. So harezu tachazu harez achila. He's being mechal the hegdish, and he's being mechal behemis hachulin. There is a Temurah. That's not called Temurah. Ela kepei the balas mum b'zuah behema. Because he's being paid the bal mum b'zuah behema. So the mela. So since he's dealing with the hegdish, so basically his involvement is taking the kedusha of the hegdish, and taking the kedusha of the hegdish through the chul. Now, if he would say harezu Temurah zu, so it makes no difference where he'd put his hand, whether his hand is on the kodesh or on the chul. Either way, it's an union of Temurah, and memela would be an isur Temurah. Over here, when he's saying arezu tachazu, so the lashon tachazu could be understood in two ways. Either tachazu means you're being magdish the chulin, and you want the hegdish on the chulin should be tachas, the hegdish of the hegdish, or you want that the hegdish should be mafkir. In other words, your interest is starting with being mafkir the kedusha of the hegdish, and then once you mafkir the kedusha of the hegdish, so then the kedusha of the hegdish is going to be chal on the chulin. That's the question. How is it going? Is it going first to the chulin and through that being mafkir the kedusha of the hegdish, or taking away the kedusha of the hegdish and that being mafkir on the chul, putting it on the chul? Halacha gimel. Hoyu lefanav sholish behemis kotchim mizbeach v'achas mehem balas mum shari hiyemedis lepidyen al sholish behemis tmimis chulin. He has another three behemis tmimis of chulin. There's nachmal. He has three behemis of kotchim. Two of them are tmimim, and one of them is a balmum, and then he has another three behemoths which are chulin, and they're all tmimis. Now we learned before that when a person says harei zu tachazu, so that's considered Temurah. That's what the Rambam said in the beginning. A Temurah that the Baal HaKorban says harei zu tachazu. That's considered Temurah. That was one thing we learned. Then we learned in halacha base that if he has two behemoths, one chulin and one hegdish, and he puts his yodi on one of the behemoths, and he says harezu tachazu. So it depends on which behemoth he was putting his hand on. If he was putting the hand on behemoth's chulin, so then that's called Temurah. And if he was putting the hand on behemoth's hegdish, so then that's called pidyon. That's not called Temurah. That's called pidyon. Now what happens if he doesn't put his? So Vaistus halacha aleph is talking about they were both tmimim. They were both tmimim. If they're both tmimim, and what he says harezu tachazu, so that's called Temurah. In halacha beis, we were talking about also that one of them was a tom, and the hegdish was a balmum already. That's what we're saying. And then it depends where he put his hand on. If he put his hand on the hegdish, if he put his hand on the hegdish, so then that's considered pidyon. Mashengen, if he put his hand on the chulin, that's called Temurah. Now, what happens if he didn't put his hand on any? He didn't put his hand on any, and one of them was a balmum. The Rambam really didn't talk about it. The Rambam didn't talk about it, but here the Rambam is going to talk about it. In other words, he's going to say derech agav. He says that's going to be part of this halacha. So, Vaistus, that's agdama to this halacha. That's pashut. that if a person has two behemoths, one is a balmum, which is the kachim is a balmum, which is a midopidya, and then there's a chulin, which is not a balmum, it's a tamim, or even if it is a balmum, the chulin doesn't make a difference. And he says harezu tachazu. He says harezu tachazu. So then we understand that it's considered chilul. It's not considered temurah. Whereas when he puts his hand on the chulin and he says harezu tachazu, so that we learn halacha beis, that's when it's called temurah. If they're both tmimim and he says harezu tachazu, it's also called temurah. Masha'enkin, if the hegdish is a balmum, so it needs pidyon, and now you have a tamim, a behem which is a tamim, which is chulin, and you say harezu tachazu, so then the din is that we assume that it's chilul, not pidyon. That's chilul and not pidyon. Nachamo. When you have two behemoths which are both tmimim and chulin and the hegdish, so when you say harezu tachazu, so we understand that that's called temurah. If you have a behemoth which one with the hegdish is a balmum, and the other and the chulin is a tamim, and you put your hand on them, so then it depends if you put your hand on the hegdish or on the chulin. If you put your hand on the chulin, so then it's called temurah. If you put your hand on the hegdish, then it's called pidyon. Now, what happens if you have hegdish? You have a behemoth which is hegdish and a balmum, and you have a behemoth which is a tamim and is chulin, and you say harezu tachazu, and you don't put your hand on it. So then the din is that we assume that it's chilul. We don't assume that it's temurah. We don't assume that it's temurah because over here it's a behemoth which is emed l'chilul. Whereas the behemoth needs pidyon, so then we assume that it's pidyon. Now in halacha gimel, the chiddush is going to be that even though you have a number of behemoths, so you have three behemoths, two of them are chulin, are tmimim. You have three behemoths of kachim, two of them are tamim, and one of them is chulin. Then you have another three behemoths of chulin, which they're all tamim. And now you go ahead and you say, Hare elu tachas elu. So benigeh, the tmimim and the tmimim, so over there, that's definitely called temurah, and therefore you get malchus for it. Just like we learned in the beginning of the halach, when the person is harezu tachazu, so you get malchus, that's called temurah. And you have two tmimim of kachim, and you have two tmimim of chulin, so there's a din malchus, there's a din temurah, and there's a din malchus. Now we have l'chura a third behemoth. You have a third behemoth. One behemoth is a balmum of kachim, and the other behemoth is tamim. So the question is this person having in mind the din of temurah? In other words, the din of temurah, which, as we said before, the din of temurah means that I'm working on the chulin, that the chulin should become kodesh, and then memela, the kedusha of the kachim is going to carry over to the chulin, which is kodesh. Or we're working on the kachim. We're saying that the kachim, we're trying to be paid to the kachim and be mechal the kachim. L'chura, he said one word. He said hari elu tachas elu, and we see that this person is l'chura now worried about doing an avera because he's getting malchus. He's getting malchus for the other two that are chul, to other two which are tamim. So what about the third? So that's the chiddush. What the Rambam is saying, that even though he's getting malchus for the other two, it's becoming temurah and his leika. But nevertheless, the one that you could say is tchilul, we say it's chilul. That's this halacha gimel. Halacha gimel. Hoyu lefanav shalish behemoths kachim mizbech. He had three behemoths, which were all three kachim mizbech. And va'achas men balas mum, and one of them was a balmum. Sharehi emedis lepidyon. So this balmum is emedis lepidyon. And now he has another shalish behemoths tmimis, which are chul. And va'amar, now he goes ahead and says, Hari elu tachas elu. That these korbanos of chulin should be tachas elu of the kachim. So the din is azay. Harei shtayim and achulin, tachas shtayim atmimis. So the shtayim and achulin are tachas shtayim and atmimis, and therefore tmuras and tmura. So that's a din of tmura. When a person says elu tachas elu or zu tachas zu, so that's tmura. This is tamim and this is tamim. So memela v'leik alev shtayim. But v'habehema shlishis, the behema shlishis is he tachas balas mum shenischal Allah. So that becomes tachas the balas mum, that it became the schalul on this behema shlishis, rather than became temurah. It's tachas a behema shlishis shenischal Allah ulachalul nischav v'leila hamerba. So the mele the behemas chulin, the behemas kachim, which is a balmum, becomes uis kaddish, and the kedusha is transferred on the tamim, which it got the kedusha transfer. So in other words, the two tmimim of the kachim remain kaddish, because hayahu tmurasi yakedesh. Masha'enka the balmum loses its kedusha, and that kedusha is transferred on the third tamim. Shekiv and sheyesh lefon of derech iser v'hi Temurah v'derech haheter v'hu achil. When he's going ahead and he's saying zu tachazu elu tachas elu, when he says zu tachazu, and one of them, and the kachim is a balmum, and the chulin is a tomim, so we assume that when he said zu tachazu, he means to say chilul, not Temurah. V'derech nochamal shekiven sheyesh lefonav derech yisur v'yat Temurah, and v'derech heter v'yachil is chazoki sheino de miniach haheter v'eso yisur. Lefichach eino leike sholish malchus, he only gets 3 malchus, and also that the negay also that the chul that the balmum becomes chul, the balmum becomes chul. No nochamal. Just to make it again. The din is that when there's 2 tmimim and he says zutachazdu, that's Temurah. When one of them is the kachim is a balmum, and then he has chulin, which is a tomim, let's say, and he goes and he says zutachazu without putting his hand on it, so then we assume that he wants to say chilul. He doesn't want to make Temurah because he has an option to do chilul. So why should he do Temurah? He should do Temurah. If he puts his hand on the chulin and he says Arizu tachazu, so then lapel, since his hand was on the chulin, so then we say it's Temurah. Masha'inkin, if his hand is not on the chulin and not on the kachim, so then we understand that it's chilul. Now over here, the chiddush is that over here, this person in the same words, he's making Temurah, because lapel, there's tmimim there also. He's saying Arei elu tachas elu, and over there, this tmimim is getting malchus. Nevertheless, on the third one, which over there it's a balmum, so and there's an option of saying that it's chilul and not Temurah. So we say that even though he's doing 2 averos, but nevertheless we say ein adam aniach haheter ve'eso yisur. So therefore we understand that his kavana wasn't for Temurah; his kavana was chilul. That's talking about 3 behemoths. V'chein imamer esa behemoths elu tachas esa behemoths elu. And again, v'achas membalas mum. One of the kachim was a balmum. Is ein leik elotesha malchus. Why? Because we understand shabehema asiris l'chalil l'nischal. We understand that the behema asiris is not trying to make Temurah from the behema asiris. He's trying to make chilul l'nischal. V'leila hamerbo. Sha'aval b'shahuch zigzeh b'malchus harbi. He's getting 9 malchus. So the Churi is not really worried about being over on the Yisr Temurah. There's a possibility of being mechal of this carbon, of this behemoth, rather than making Temurah. Being mechal is einem maniach dvar haheter v'eso Yisr. He's not going to be maniach the haheter v'eso Yisr. Shtei behemoths shel hegdish v'achas mem balimum u'shtei behemoths shel chulin v'achas mem balimum. He has 2 behemoths, one set of behemoths of hegdish, and one of them is a balmum. And now he has another set of behemoths of chulin, and one of them is balmum. And v'amar hare'elu tachaselu. So again, we're saying that the balmum of the hegdish, he's being machal, and the tamim of the hegdish, he's making Temurah. Now the question, with which behemoth is he making Temurah? So we say harei hatmima, Temurah satmima. Pashtus, if he's making Temurah for one of the behemoth which is a tamim, he's making Temurah for it. The pashtus, he's making Temurah with the tamim. He's not going to be matfis the kedusha on a balmum. Masha'inkin benegeh the chilul, which is being machal, he's being machal the behemoth, which is a balmum. So he's being machal on another balmum. So we meila hare'elu tachas elu. So hare'atmima, we assume that the tmima is Temurah atmima, and v'leika achas u'balas hamum muchulalas al balas hamum. The pashtus, he's being machal the balmum, the original balmum, on this next balmum. She'enim aniach haheter ve'eso ha'yisur. Again, he's not miniach haheter ve'eso ha'yisur, and he's going to go and make Temurah. He's making chilul. That's what we said before. That's the same thing. He's ain't miniach haheter ve'eso ha'yisur, so we assume that it's chilul, and then we understand that the chilul is on a balmum. The chilul is not any different if you be mechal on a balmum or on a tamim. But on the other end, there's no svara that you're going to make Temurah on a balmum. Halacha dal. So l'chura, this din she'enim minei haheter ve'eso ha'yisur is the general din that he was talking about the whole time. It's not been again this specific din. L'chura, the whole chiddush of this din is that we assume that the balmum is being paid at the balmum, and the tamim is becoming a Temurah for the tamim. That's l'chura this din. L'chura for that din is not negay l'chura this enim minei haheter ve'eso ha'yisur l'chura. So that's going back on the original din. Halacha dalet. Ha'omer harezu Temuras elu shlam. So you said l'chatchila Temuras elu shlam. So dvarav kayam. Memela, what do you do with the behemoth when it's a Temuras Eila V'Shlam? Obviously, we're talking about that there's an Eila and Shlamim there. There's an Eila Shlam there, and he's saying, Areza Temuras of these carbonas, which are Eila Shlam. So Memela is Timacher, you have to go sell it. V'yavi b'chatzi mida mea Temuras Eila, b'chatzida mea Temuras Shlam. Amar, he said, Harezu Temuras Eila, and then he added Utmuras Shlam. He didn't say Temuras Eila Ushlam. He said Temuras Eila, and then he said Temuras Shlam. Is im niskaven lechak kach mitchili lechatchila wanted to say Temuras Eila or Temuras Shlamim is dvar of kayam, so it's the same thing like before. That he brings chatzida met Temuras Eila, chatzida met Temuras Shlam. However, im lo niskaven mitchila Temuras Eila, what he meant really to say was originally that he wants it should be Temuras Eila, Arezu Temuras Eila, and v'chazav amar Temuras Shlam, and he added the word Temuras Shlam. Af opi shechazav b'techdei dibur is ein tefs by Hegdish. You don't say the din of techdei dibur. Memela the kedusha was chal is ein tefsin al lashon rishon. Memela v'arei Temuras Eila bolvat. So Memela, since he said originally Temuras Eila, and that's what he meant to say, and then he just changed his mind, and he wants to add also Temuras Shlamim, so that's not accepted. Memela has a din of a Temuras Eila.